So with only one episode to go in this season of American Horror Story after this week's episode, Rain and Fire, we're forced to ask ourselves, are they still on a good path to end this season on a high note? Let's talk about it. Hey YouTubers, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload. Enjoy the video. That's right, guys. Today we're going to be talking about episode 9 of American Horror Story Apocalypse, this 10-episode season. We only got one more episode at the ending of this season. So, guys, I have to say, and I might be the only one sitting here who actually believes this, but these new characters from Billy Eichner and Evan Peters, I think, were the highlight of this week's episode. Of course, just having the ability to focus on Evan Peters and Sarah Paulson and Billy Eichner, who were and have been some of the highlights over the last couple seasons, Sarah Paulson and Evan Peters being the major exception there and being the highlights for the vast majority, if not the entire show thus far, outside of probably Jessica Lange or Emma Roberts whenever she comes in, Kathy Bates, or anybody else. I think it's possible to say that this was the most enjoyable part of this episode. And I think one of the reasons for that is because these two characters, as I speculated last week and I have been kind of pushing over the last couple days, is that they are the ones who are going to get Michael to figure out what he wants to do in his lifetime, how he wants to bring about the apocalypse. They are going to be the ones who whisper in his ear what he needs to do and get us to those first 3 episodes of this season. And this episode vindicated that viewpoint. And in an interesting way too, as I speculated last week, they were going to do it through their own Miss Mead robot, which was pretty interesting if you think about it, considering, this whole heaven, hell, God, devil, Antichrist, Jesus. The humans look to our saviors in order to actually come and give us what we want, or at least reset the world in a major way. But it's humans creating a robot, which is really the God parable for humans, creating life that wasn't really there before, knowing that this Miss Mead robot is actually really sentient to a way where she has memories of what happened in her past despite never actually being alive. To me, that is really kind of interesting, and I love the fact that they decided to really go in that direction because it felt so obvious after last week, and I think the way that they handled it was pretty nice. These guys are tired of the world, and they're going to make sure that Michael makes the right decision, primarily through the cooperative, which they have been building up ever since the first couple episodes of this season, but they haven't really explored how it's all set up and what exactly it is. Well, this episode, they answer that question, which I'm sure a lot of you knew, but I haven't really seen a whole lot of people talking about this. I guess it really wasn't on the tip of everyone's tongue or something we all thought was really important, but the cooperative is the Illuminati. Of course, in retrospect, that seems pretty obvious. I mean, that's exactly what this would be, and it's just kind of the easiest explanation into what this is. Just a name change for PR's sake, because after television shows and books and everyone's kind of overblown the concept of what the Illuminati is, they just needed a PR change and a name change just to kind of get under the radar again. Maybe that's too easy of an explanation. Why didn't they just use Illuminati? Did they really need to have that be like some kind of a twist factor for us? I'm not really sure. Tell me what you think about that in the comment section below. But as I said, these two characters, Miss Venable, building up that entire story, at least in my opinion, for this episode, was the most interesting thing. I like the idea of them approaching Miss Venable, who goes to them at the very beginning of the episode and says, I want more respect. You need to tell me what's going on or I'm going to quit. Obviously, they don't want to do that at first. She quits, and then they go to her and say, well, you've been really helpful. We don't want to lose you. By the way, we're bringing out the apocalypse. We can't accept your resignation, and you're going to be in charge of an outpost with your own rules. Of course, this is really bringing back one of the conversations she had with Michael when she was at the outpost and before Miss Mead killed her, was she knew the people who put this in power. She was told that she can make her own rules, and this was something that Michael challenged her on when he came to the Outpost 3 for the very first time. I'm wondering how that's going to play out in the last episode of this season, but really, guys, it's going to feel rushed at this point. I really don't know what they're going to do. I guess we'll talk about that more later, not only in this video, but also as the week goes on, and whether or not they're going to make a season 9 continuation for Apocalypse just to kind of tell this story. But let's just kind of take a little bit more time to explain what happened in this show, this episode, and what I actually liked about it. So yeah, all of that was basically the Miss Venable corporation part, getting everything ready, making sure that Michael with Miss Mead knows that he has to take on the apocalypse, do his father's duty, and bring about the end of the world for the rich and powerful who are going to repopulate or at least be comfortable in their outposts. At the same time, we go back to Cordelia, we go back to the Coven, and Michael and Miss Mead getting in there, making a deal with the Voodoo Queen to break into the Coven house and kill all of the witches. Of course, besides Mallory and Madison and all the other witches that we saw from the very beginning of this season when they came in episode 3. That's how that happened. Michael, because he killed all these witches, and after we saw the events of episode 6, can literally erase their souls. They can't bring anybody else back. So Zoe and Queenie, they're dead. They're all dead. And that's actually one of the biggest things a lot of people have been talking about over the last couple of weeks when it comes to this show is where exactly are these witches? I mean, did they die? How did they die? And why aren't they just bringing them back? Well, they gave us an explanation back in episode 6, and now they kind of followed through with it. My only real annoyance there, and of course I'm going to explain more about this later on in the review because I feel like it's definitely worth mentioning with this last episode, but my only real annoyance there is that they brought back Queenie from her death in hotel in a really big way a couple episodes ago just to simply kill her off and erase her soul again. So she's dead, they can't bring her back, and there's just another morning session with her and her character. It kind of feels a little out there. Like, why did we do that if it's just going to lead to the apocalypse? Of course, the reason they did that, and I just believe that this is how it's going to end up based off the events of this episode, is Mallory is going to actually waken her powers. I don't know right now, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know right now, whether or not she's an angel or the answer to the Antichrist, or maybe she's just, the Supreme or something, the next Supreme who's going to come in and actually fix everything. She can turn back time, and that's one of the things they heavily played off in this episode was they made her go back to 1918 Russia to save Anastasia from murder. And while she wasn't able to do that, she did express more of her power than she's ever shown before. And we got at least a little bit of a chance to see the expansion of the Coven world, the witches, and the history of American Horror Story. To me, that's probably enough for me. Like, it was actually kind of cool to see that. I really wish that they had focused a little bit on Rasputin, considering they've already introduced warlocks and all these other different magical entities. I want to see what Rasputin was in this world, because that is a story I feel like American Horror Story, or just a horror story in general from Ryan Murphy in this world, can actually tell and be really interesting. Just a hint, wink wink, if you ever wanted to do like kind of a sequel or world building opportunity with Coven, let's do that. If you're gonna make Anastasia a witch, then Rasputin needs to be a part of that story, but that is beyond the point. That was an interesting power display for Mallory, just trying to building up the concept of her going to be the one who usurps Cordelia at the end of all of this, and really just setting her up to be someone they hide away in order for them to be protected in the outpost during the apocalypse itself. The last thing though that I really want to talk about here is, while Michael goes in and kills all the Coven witches, they make a very clear point that he goes in and kills all the warlocks too, setting up the Outpost 3 for those first 3 episodes. So all in all, it was kind of an interesting episode. I like the concept of Miss Mead and Michael getting the idea of the apocalypse from literally just people who worship the Antichrist, worship Satan, and do their best to actually go against the flow of civilization, want to see it end, and then also feeding that information into Satan's son like it's his own decision-making process, talking to a robot that they created and they're feeding words into. I think that's the most interesting thing that this season has done, and I can't wait to see how they express it in the last episode. And them getting to the cooperative, meeting all of these people and starting to build plans for these outposts and making sure that people actually survive this. An interesting point in the episode. I was just kind of mad where they cut it off. I was like, wow, there's so much more to actually explore here. I wish that we would actually spend more time. And the very fact that we only have 1 episode to go when it comes to this entire season, I just felt like, okay, this was a bit rushed. And I hope that next week's episode is not only longer, but also really well-rounded if we're not going to be getting a sequel season next season, season 9 being a direct continuation of Apocalypse itself. Of course, I think everything that they've done with Mallory over the course of this season and everything they did in this episode really indicates the fact that she is going to be the catalyst of literally reversing time, or maybe even going back in time and killing Michael before everything in the first 3 episodes happened to save the world. And look, that's totally fine if that's the but I can't be the only one sitting here believing that maybe that will be a cop-out if they actually do that. Like, let's explore the apocalypse. Let's hopefully explore the apocalypse and not just save this to some grandiose power that no one's ever had before besides Mallory, who's going to be the next supreme of this coven, and everything's going to end happy-go-lucky at the very end of this. If that's the case, then why even introduce Emily and Timothy into the apocalypse story to begin with? Just to confuse us, just to kind of throw us off the scent? I'm not really sure. So guys, what are your thoughts on this season thus far? What was your thoughts on episode 9 of American Horror Story Apocalypse, entitled Reign of Fire? Do you like the concept that Michael and Miss Mead are now meeting the cooperative and getting everything in place? Do you like the fact that we're still in flashback episodes and dealing with the coven and all these other things? And we only have 1 episode left to go to actually wrap up this entire story, not to mention all of the various things they set up in the first 3 episodes that we haven't really even touched, and it's going to be hard for them to really continue in that way. Do you think that season 9 is going to be a direct continuation of this season, just to kind of pad out the story and actually explore the apocalypse a little bit more? Or do you think it's going to be like all the other seasons before and be a completely original story? I hope everyone's having a fantastic day. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload. It's been real.